Two people buy the exact same house on the exact same day. Same street, same price, same lender, same interest rate, same income, down to the dollar. They even close on the same afternoon, 20 minutes apart, at the same title office outside Columbus, Ohio. For the next 30 years, their lives look almost identical. Same jobs, same raises, same $500 of spare cash left over every single month after bills, groceries, and everything else life throws at them. But they make one different decision, just one. David takes his $500 and throws it at the mortgage every month, on top of the regular payment, determined to be debt-free as fast as possible. Sarah takes her $500 and puts it into an S&P 500 index fund every month, betting that the market will do more for her than a mortgage payoff ever could. Both of them believe, with total confidence, that they are making the smarter financial decision. Both of them would tell you the other one is leaving money on the table. Here's what nobody tells either of them. By the time 30 years have passed, one of these two people will have made a mistake that costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not a small mistake, a six-figure one, and it's probably not the person you're guessing right now. Because when you actually run the real numbers, real interest rates, real market returns, real taxes, real risk, almost everything you've heard about paying off your mortgage versus investing turns out to be either incomplete or flat out wrong. Let's find out who actually wins. David and Sarah both bought a $410,000 home with 20% down, leaving them each a $328,000 mortgage. Their rate is 6.75% fixed for 30 years, which, as of this year, is almost exactly the national average, so this isn't a cherry-picked scenario. Their monthly payment, principal and interest, comes out to $2,127. That's the baseline. That's what both of them owe no matter what. The only variable is what happens to that extra $500 sitting in their checking account at the end of the month. David funnels his straight into the mortgage principal. Sarah funnels hers straight into the market. For the first year, almost nothing happens. This is the part nobody shows you because it's not exciting. After 12 months, David's loan balance sits at $318,315. Sarah's sits at $324,504, a gap of about $6,000. Meanwhile, Sarah's brokerage account has grown to roughly $6,270. If you stopped the story here, you'd think this whole debate was pointless. The difference is a rounding error. Fast forward to year 5, and the gap starts to widen. David's balance has dropped to $272,347. Sarah still owes $307,912 on the house, but her investment account has climbed to $38,281. She's behind on the mortgage, ahead on paper. Neither of them can tell yet who's winning because the two piles of money aren't the same kind of money. One is illiquid equity trapped inside a house. The other is a number on a screen she could cash out tomorrow. By year 10, something interesting happens. David has hacked his balance down to $194,425. He's covered more than half the loan. Sarah's portfolio has crossed $99,932, closing in on 6 figures, purely from compounding on $500 a month. This is the year most people watching this story would place their bet and walk away confident. Don't. Because at year 18, David does something Sarah won't be able to do for another 12 years. He makes his final mortgage payment. Balance. 0. No more $2,127 a month. No more interest. The house is his, free and clear, 12 years ahead of schedule. Over those 18 years, he paid a total of $239,419 in interest. Compare that to the $437,865 Sarah's loan would rack up if she wrote it out the full 30 years on the standard schedule. David just locked in a guaranteed tax-free saving of $198,445. Nobody can take that away from him. There's no market crash that erases it. So now David does the obvious thing. He takes what used to be his mortgage payment, adds it to his old $500 surplus, and starts investing all $2,627 of it every single month. Late start, bigger checks. Sarah, meanwhile, still owes $209,575 on her house at that point, but her portfolio has already grown to $285,919. She's had 18 years of compounding working in her favor while David had 0. This is where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable for whichever side you've already picked. Before we get to year 30, we need to talk about why professional financial advice on this topic is such a mess. Because it's not that these people are wrong, it's that they're each solving a different problem and presenting it as universal truth. A certain famous radio host built an entire empire on telling people to kill every debt, including the mortgage, before investing a dime. He's not doing bad math. He's solving for behavior. He's seen, over decades of callers, that people who invest the difference often don't. They spend it on a vacation or a new truck, and the plan quietly falls apart. His advice isn't optimized for the best possible spreadsheet outcome. It's optimized for people who don't trust themselves. Meanwhile, the finance influencers pushing early retirement will tell you to invest every spare dollar and never prepay a fixed-rate mortgage at a rate this low. They're not wrong on the math either. Historically, the market has out-earned a 6 to 7% mortgage rate more often than not. But they're solving for someone in their late 20s or 30s with 30 years of runway and nerves of steel during a crash. Real estate accounts will tell you debt is a tool, that paying off a mortgage early is wasting leverage. Convenient, considering their entire business model depends on you buying more property, not paying off the one you already own. And a financial advisor charging a percentage of your invested assets has a quiet incentive to steer you toward investing more and paying off debt slower. Because more assets under their management means a bigger fee every single year, whether you actually come out ahead or not. None of these people are lying to you. They're just each answering a slightly different question and calling it the answer. Now, the part nobody talks about, and the part that actually decides who wins this entire 30-year story. Before either David or Sarah does anything else, there's a step that beats both of their strategies combined: an employer 401k match. If either of them has access to one and isn't maxing it out first, they're walking past a guaranteed, instant 100% return on every dollar before they've even opened a brokerage account or sent an extra check to the mortgage company. This sounds obvious once you hear it. Almost nobody accounts for it in these debates. Then there's the tax deduction everybody assumes is helping the mortgage side of this argument. It mostly isn't. The standard deduction for a married couple filing jointly is roughly $29,200. David's interest payment in year one alone is about $22,140, and that's before you add anything else. Unless he's stacking large charitable gifts or other itemized deductions on top, he never even clears the standard deduction. The mortgage interest write-off that real estate agents love to mention is, for most ordinary homeowners today, basically theoretical. Then there's the tax bill Sarah eventually owes that David never will. When Sarah finally sells her portfolio, she owes capital gains tax on every dollar of growth, 15% for most income levels. Run that against her year 30 balance of just over $1,031,000, and roughly $851,000 of that is pure gain. After tax, she's left with about $903,700. David's smaller, later starting portfolio owes the same tax on its own gains, and nets out to roughly $655,700 after tax. Sarah is still ahead, but the gap just shrank by nearly $80,000, purely because of a tax bill David will simply never receive on the interest he saved. And here's the one almost nobody says out loud. Paying down a mortgage is a guaranteed risk-free return. Every extra dollar David sends the bank locks in 6.75% immediately with zero volatility, and it's already tax-free by nature. Sarah's return is not guaranteed. It's an average built from decades of ups and violent downs. A 10% historical average includes years where the market dropped 30, 40, even 50%. If a crash lands early in her investing timeline, a bad sequence of returns, she doesn't just lose money, she loses the compounding years she needed most to recover, which raises the real question this entire video has been building toward. What if the market simply doesn't return 10%? Run the same 30-year comparison assuming a more conservative 7% average instead of 10%, and Sarah's lead nearly vanishes. She ends up ahead by less than $3,000. Statistically, a coin flip. Drop the assumption to match David's mortgage rate exactly, 6.75%, and David actually pulls ahead by roughly $14,000. Drop it further to 6%, and David wins outright by close to $60,000. The entire outcome of this story, the thing that determines whether Sarah's decision was brilliant or whether David's was, hinges on a number nobody can know in advance: what the market actually does over the next 30 years. That's the plot twist. This was never really a math problem. It's a bet on the future dressed up as one. Now picture year 12 for both of them, right in the middle of the story, before David's mortgage is paid off. Before Sarah's portfolio has really taken off. David loses his job. 6 months without a paycheck. Here's the problem nobody warns you about. All that extra money David sent to the mortgage over the past 12 years didn't disappear, but it's not sitting in a checking account either. It's trapped inside the walls of his house. The bank doesn't care that he prepaid $80,000 of principal. His minimum payment is still due, in full, every month, whether he's employed or not. To access that equity, he'd need a home equity loan or a refinance, both of which typically require proof of income he no longer has. Sarah, going through the same 6 months, has a taxable brokerage account she can sell from immediately. It's not free. She pays capital gains tax, and if the job loss coincides with a market downturn, which recessions often cause, she may be forced to sell at a loss and lock in the damage, but she has a lever to pull. David, in this moment, does not. Neither strategy is purely safe. One trades flexibility for a guaranteed win, the other trades guarantees for flexibility. Real financial pain has a way of finding whichever weakness you didn't plan for. By year 30, both mortgages are paid off. David's the hard way over 18 years, Sarah's on the standard schedule. Their homes, appreciating at a realistic 4% a year the entire time, are each worth roughly $1,330,000. That part is identical, so it cancels out of the comparison entirely. What doesn't cancel out is the portfolio. Sarah finishes with about $1,031,000. David finishes with about $704,600. Before tax, Sarah is ahead by roughly $326,800. After capital gains tax, that lead shrinks to about $248,000. Still a win, still real money, but nowhere near as dominant a victory as just invest and let compounding do the work content usually promises, and entirely dependent on a market that averaged closer to 10% than 6%. So who actually won? Mathematically, over this specific 30-year run, at this specific rate, assuming historical average market returns hold up for another 3 decades, Sarah did by roughly $250,000 after-tax dollars. But David bought something Sarah didn't. 18 years of a guaranteed outcome, zero exposure to a crash wiping out his progress, and total certainty the day he made his final payment. Sarah bought something David didn't. Liquidity when it mattered, and a bet on the market that happened to pay off. Neither of them was wrong. They were just playing different games with the same $500. So what should you actually do? Not always invest, not always pay off the house. A framework based on where you actually stand. If your mortgage rate is under roughly 5%, the kind millions of Americans locked in during 2020 and 2021, the math isn't close. Historically, the market has beaten that rate often enough that investing the difference is very likely the stronger move, and prepaying that debt early is probably the mistake. If your rate looks like David and Sarah's in the high 6s or 7s, which is where new buyers sit right now, the math tightens into something close to a coin flip. At that point, the decision stops being about spreadsheets and starts being about you, your risk tolerance, your job stability, your ability to actually leave that $500 invested for 30 years without touching it. If you're within a decade of retirement, going into that decade mortgage-free removes a fixed monthly obligation right when you can least afford a bad sequence of market returns. That safety has value a spreadsheet doesn't fully capture. If you're young with decades of runway and steady income, time is the one asset you have more of than anyone else in this story, and time is exactly what makes compounding work. If your income is unstable, commission-based, self-employed, tied to an industry that cycles through layoffs, locking every spare dollar into home equity the way David did can quietly turn into a trap the moment the unexpected happens. Liquidity buys you options. And if you already know, honestly, that money sitting in a brokerage account tends to disappear into things you didn't plan for. There is real value in a plan that forces your hand, even if it isn't the plan with the highest expected return on paper. The real mistake in this entire debate was never choosing to invest. It was never choosing to pay off the mortgage. The real mistake is taking advice built for someone else's income, someone else's mortgage rate, someone else's risk tolerance, and someone else's timeline, and applying it to your life as if it were universal law. David and Sarah didn't lose to each other. They both won, just on different terms in different currencies. One in certainty, one in upside. The only way either of them could have actually lost is by borrowing a stranger's confident answer instead of running their own numbers. If this content was valuable, I'd appreciate if you hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.